Captain Jake Rodriguez never thought he would survive another day, let alone become the hero of the biggest space battle in human history. The morning started like any other aboard the Earth defense ship Aurora. He was drinking his usual black coffee in the mess hall when the alarm bells started ringing throughout the entire ship. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill, came the announcement over the intercom. Jake quickly finished his coffee and rushed to the command deck. What he saw through the massive viewing windows made his heart skip a beat. Hundreds of alien ships surrounded their small diplomatic fleet. These weren't just any aliens, these were the Zephyrians, the most powerful warrior race in the galaxy. Their ships looked like floating crystal palaces. Beautiful but deadly, the peace talks on the planet below had gone terribly wrong. Earth's leaders had been trying to negotiate mining rights on a distant planet, but the Zephyrian Emperor got angry when humans refused to give up their claim to 3 valuable asteroid fields. Instead of continuing talks, the Emperor challenged Earth to an ancient ritual called the Trial of Champions. What does that mean? Jake asked his commanding officer, Colonel Davis. It means they want to settle this the old way, the colonel replied grimly. Single combat, their best warrior against our best warrior. Winner takes everything. Jake's stomach dropped. Everyone knew about Zephyrian warriors. They stood 8 feet tall, had natural armor like skin, and could lift a small vehicle with their bare hands. They had been training for combat since childhood. How could any human possibly win against such creatures? The original champion chosen by Earth was Captain Rodriguez, their strongest soldier and martial arts expert. But just hours before the battle, Rodriguez collapsed with severe food poisoning. The ship's doctor said he would be unconscious for at least 2 days. Panic spread through the command deck. Without a champion, Earth would have to surrender all claims to the mining rights. Worse, they would be seen as cowards by every other alien race in the galaxy. This could destroy any chance of peaceful relations with other worlds. We need a volunteer, Colonel Davis announced to the crew. Someone who can represent Earth in the Trial of Champions. The room fell silent. Everyone knew it was basically a death mission. The Zephyrian champion was called Thrax the Undefeated. He had won over 100 battles and never lost a single fight. Jake found himself stepping forward before he could even think about it. I'll do it, sir. Colonel Davis looked surprised. Jake was a good soldier, but he wasn't the biggest or strongest on the ship. He was just an average guy from Texas who joined the Space Force to see the galaxy. Son, are you sure about this? The colonel asked. Someone has to do it, Jake replied. Besides, maybe being smaller will help somehow. 2 hours later, Jake found himself standing in a massive arena on the planet's surface. Thousands of aliens from dozens of different species had gathered to watch the fight. The arena was carved from black stone and looked like something from ancient Rome, but much larger. The Zephyrian Emperor sat on a throne made of what looked like compressed starlight. Around him stood his 7 daughters, the princesses of the Empire. Jake could see them clearly from where he stood. 6 of them were absolutely beautiful, with shimmering scales that changed colors like oil on water. They looked like mythical creatures from fairy tales. But the 7th princess stood apart from the others, hidden in shadows at the back of the royal platform, even from a distance. Jake could see she was different. Her scales were dull gray. Her posture was awkward, and she seemed to be trying to make herself invisible. The crowd roared as Thrax entered the arena. The Zephyrian champion was even more terrifying in person. His scales were deep blue and seemed to be made of metal. His arms were thick as tree trunks, and his eyes glowed with an inner fire. He carried a massive sword that would have taken 3 humans just to lift out. Jake had only his standard military gear, a simple sword, basic armor, and his wits. He felt like a child facing a giant. The battle began with Thrax charging across the arena like a runaway train. Jake barely dodged the first swing of the massive sword, which left a crater in the stone floor where he had been standing. The crowd cheered for their champion. For the first few minutes, Jake could only run and dodge. Every swing of Thrax's sword could have cut him in half. But as the fight continued, Jake began to notice something. Thrax was incredibly strong and fast, but he fought the same way every time. His attacks followed patterns, Like a dance he had memorized, Jake's military training kicked in. He had studied dozens of different fighting styles and learned to spot weaknesses in any combat system. Slowly, he began to see gaps in Thrax's defense. The breakthrough came when Jake noticed that Thrax always paused for exactly 2 seconds after his overhead strike to prepare for his next move. In that tiny window, the champion's left side was completely unprotected. Jake waited for his chance. When Thrax raised his sword high for another devastating attack, Jake didn't dodge backward like before. Instead, he rolled forward, right between the champion's legs, and struck at the weak point he had discovered, a gap in the ceremonial armor. Right behind the knee, Thrax stumbled and fell forward. His own momentum and massive weight worked against him as he crashed into the arena wall. The impact was so hard that cracks appeared in the ancient stone. The crowd fell completely silent. Thrax tried to get up but couldn't put weight on his injured leg. After a few moments, he raised his hand in surrender. Jake couldn't believe it. He had actually won. The human crowd went wild, but the alien spectators seemed shocked into silence. The Emperor stood up slowly, his face showing a mixture of disbelief and respect. According to ancient law, he now had to honor the terms of the trial. The winner could claim any prize from the royal treasury, choose a reward, human champion. The Emperor announced in a voice that echoed throughout the arena. Everyone expected Jake to ask for the mining rights, or perhaps gold and precious gems. Some thought he might be bold enough to ask for one of the beautiful princesses as a bride, which was allowed under Zephyrian law. Jake looked up at the royal platform. The 6 beautiful princesses stood proudly, each one more stunning than the last. Any man in the galaxy would consider himself lucky to marry even the least of them. But Jake's eyes were drawn to the 7th princess, still standing in the shadows. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't figure out what. As he watched, she made a small movement with her hand, tracing geometric patterns in the air while she thought. Suddenly, Jake's heart started racing. He knew that gesture. He had seen it before, months ago, in a place very far from here. Could it really be her? Without hesitation, Jake pointed directly at the 7th princess. I choose her as my bride. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. The Emperor's eyes widened in surprise. Even the other princesses looked confused. Jake had just chosen the ugliest princess in the Empire, the one everyone considered cursed or deformed. But Jake smiled as he made his choice, because unlike everyone else in that arena, he knew exactly who Princess Zirith really was, and he remembered a debt that needed to be repaid. The shocked gasps from the crowd still echoed in Jake's ears as he was escorted from the arena. Nobody could understand why he had chosen Princess Zirith over her beautiful sisters. Even his own team members were whispering among themselves, wondering if the stress of battle had affected his mind. But Jake knew something nobody else did. His choice wasn't random or crazy. It was based on a memory that had haunted him for 3 months. A memory of the most important 2 days of his life. It had happened during a secret mission on Theros, one of the smaller moons orbiting the Zephyrian homeworld. Jake's squad had been sent there to gather information about alien mining operations. The mission was supposed to be simple: get in, take pictures, get out without being seen. Everything went wrong from the very beginning. A massive meteor storm hit the moon just as their shuttle was landing. The pilot tried his best to navigate through the falling rocks, but one meteor the size of a car smashed into their left engine. The shuttle spun out of control and crashed in a deep valley, filled with crystal caves. When Jake woke up, he was alone. The crash had thrown him clear of the shuttle, but his teammates were nowhere to be found. His radio was broken, his left arm was badly hurt, and he could see that his leg was bleeding through his torn uniform. The meteor storm was still raging above him. Chunks of rock and ice were falling like deadly rain. Jake crawled toward the nearest cave entrance, hoping to find shelter until the storm passed. The caves were unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were covered in crystals that glowed with their own soft light. Some were blue, others green or purple. The light was beautiful but also eerie, creating strange shadows that seemed to dance and move. Jake found a small chamber deep in the cave system and collapsed against the wall. His injuries were worse than he first thought. The cut on his leg was deep and wouldn't stop bleeding. His arm felt like it might be broken. Worst of all, he was starting to feel dizzy and weak. That's when he heard footsteps echoing through the caves. Jake tried to hide, thinking it might be Zephyrian guards who had discovered the crash. But he was too weak to move very far. All he could do was press himself against the crystal wall and hope whoever was coming wouldn't notice him. A figure appeared at the entrance to his hiding spot. It was someone wearing a long, dark cloak with the hood pulled up, completely hiding their face. Jake couldn't tell if they were human, alien, or something else entirely. "Please," Jake whispered, not knowing what else to say. "I'm hurt." The figure paused for a moment, then slowly approached. When they knelt down beside Jake, he could see pale hands emerging from the sleeves of the cloak. The stranger began examining his injuries with gentle, careful movements. "You're losing too much blood," the figure said in perfect Standard Galactic, the common language used for communication between different alien species. The voice was soft and kind, but Jake still couldn't tell if it belonged to a man or woman. Without saying another word, the mysterious person began treating Jake's wounds. They had a small medical kit hidden under their cloak, and their skill was incredible. They cleaned the cut on his leg, applied some kind of healing gel that stopped the bleeding immediately, and wrapped his arm in a special bandage that seemed to reduce the pain. "Who are you?" Jake asked as the stranger worked. "Someone who believes that all living beings deserve help when they're hurt," came the reply. "The storm will last for 2 days. You need to stay here until it passes. For the next 2 days. Jake's mysterious rescuer took care of him. They brought him food, water, and medicine. But more than that, they talked with him for hours about everything imaginable. Jake learned that his rescuer was incredibly intelligent. They spoke 17 different languages and seemed to know the history of dozens of alien civilizations. When Jake mentioned that he was from Earth, the stranger asked thoughtful questions about human culture, philosophy, and dreams for the future. "What's it like?" the figure asked one evening as they sat watching the crystal walls glow in the darkness. "To come from a world where your people are just beginning to explore the stars." Jake thought about it carefully. "It's exciting, but also scary," he admitted. "We know there's so much out there that we don't understand. Sometimes I wonder if we're ready for it." "Readiness isn't about knowing everything," his rescuer replied. "It's about being willing to learn and to see beyond what appears obvious on the surface." The stranger was also fascinated by mathematics and science. They would trace complex geometric patterns in the air while thinking, as if the movements helped them solve problems. Jake found this habit oddly comforting. There was something peaceful about watching those graceful hand movements. On the second night, Jake's rescuer showed him how to read the crystal formations in the cave walls. "Each type of crystal tells a story about this moon's history," they explained. "These blue ones formed during volcanic periods. The green ones grew during ice ages. If you know how to read them, they're like a library of everything that happened here over millions of years." Jake was amazed. "How did you learn all this when you spend a lot of time alone?" "You learn to find knowledge and beauty in unexpected places," the stranger replied quietly. When the meteor storm finally ended, Jake could hear the sound of rescue ships in the distance. His team had survived the crash and was searching for him. "I have to go," his rescuer said, standing up quickly. "Wait," Jake called out. "I want to thank you properly. Can you at least tell me your name?" The hooded figure paused at the cave entrance. "We all wear masks, soldier. Some are just more visible than others." Before Jake could ask what that meant, the stranger disappeared into the maze of crystal caves like they had never been there at all. Jake was rescued an hour later, and his team completed their mission successfully. But he never stopped thinking about those 2 days in the caves. He tried to find information about who his rescuer might have been, but came up with nothing. Until today, when he saw Princess Zirith trace those same geometric patterns in the air while she stood in the shadows of the royal platform. The hand movements were identical. The graceful way her fingers moved, the specific pattern she drew. Jake was absolutely certain it was the same person who had saved his life. But how could the ugly princess of the Zephyrian Empire be the same brilliant, kind person who had cared for him in those caves? And why was she hiding behind such a different appearance? Jake didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. He owed his life to Princess Zirith, and now he had a chance to repay that debt. More than that, he had met the most fascinating person he had ever encountered, and he wasn't going to let her disappear into the shadows again. As the royal guards escorted him to prepare for the wedding ceremony, Jake smiled to himself. Everyone thought he had made a foolish choice, but he knew better. He had just chosen the most extraordinary person in the entire galaxy. The wedding ceremony felt like the longest day of Jake's life. The great hall of the Zephyrian Palace was filled with hundreds of alien dignitaries, all whispering and staring at him with confusion. Even his own commanding officers looked embarrassed. To be there, the ceremony itself was beautiful but strange. Floating crystals provided soft music that sounded like wind chimes mixed with whale songs. The walls were covered in living vines that glowed different colors depending on the emotions. In the room, right now, they were showing a lot of purple and gray, which Jake had learned meant confusion and doubt. Princess Zirith stood beside him during the ceremony, but she never looked up from the floor. She wore a heavy veil that covered most of her face, and her responses to the ceremonial questions were barely whispers. Jake could feel how uncomfortable she was with all the attention. The other princesses sat in the front row, looking absolutely stunning in their ceremonial gowns. Princess Lyrale, who was considered the most beautiful woman in the galaxy, kept glancing at Jake with what looked like pity. Princess Valith, famous for her brilliant military strategies, seemed genuinely puzzled by his choice. But the worst part was listening to the guests talk about him. Has the human lost his mind? Whispered one alien ambassador. Maybe it's some kind of Earth custom we don't understand. Suggested another. Poor Princess Zirith, said a third. She must be so. Embarrassed, Jake wanted to tell them all that they were wrong. But he couldn't explain without revealing Zirith's secret. He didn't even know if she wanted her true identity to be discovered. The ceremony ended with traditional Zephyrian vows. Jake spoke his part clearly and confidently, promising to honor and protect his new wife. When it was Zirith's turn, her voice was so quiet that people in the back of the hall had to lean forward to hear her. Finally, after what felt like hours of ritual and tradition, the guests began to leave. Jake and Zirith were escorted to the royal chambers that would be their new home. The room was incredible, bigger than most apartments on Earth, with walls made of the same glowing crystals Jake remembered from the caves on Theros. But as soon as the doors closed and they were alone, an awkward silence filled the room. Zirith stood by the window, still wearing her heavy veil, looking out at the alien city below. Jake could see the lights reflecting off the scales on her hands. But even those seemed dull and gray compared to her sisters. You don't have to pretend. Zirith said quietly, her back still turned to him. I know why you chose me. Jake felt his heart sink. What do you mean? You felt sorry for me. She continued, her voice filled with sadness. The ugly princess that nobody else would want. You thought you were being kind. No, Jake said firmly, taking a step toward her. That's not why I chose you at all. Zirith turned around then, and even through the veil, Jake could see the disbelief in her eyes. Then why? Any man in the galaxy would choose one of my sisters over me. I've seen myself. In mirrors, I know what I look like. This was the moment Jake had been waiting for. He took a deep breath and said the words he had been practicing since the ceremony ended. Because I know who you really are. I remember the caves of Theros, where you saved my life. I remember how you traced geometric patterns in the air when you were thinking. You told me that mathematics was the universal language that connected all thinking beings. Zirith went completely still. For a long moment, she just stared at him through her veil. Jake could practically see her brilliant mind working, trying to figure out how he had discovered her secret. You remember, she whispered, her voice shaking. But how did you recognize me? I was so careful to hide my identity. Jake smiled gently. Your hands, the way you move them when you think. I watched you do it during the arena ceremony. The same patterns you showed me in the caves. Plus, you said something that stuck with me. about how we all wear masks, and some are just more visible than others. Zerith slowly reached up and removed her veil. Even with her unusual appearance, Jake could see the intelligence and kindness in her eyes that he remembered from their time together. "I never thought you would figure it out," she said softly. "I never thought I would see you again." "Why didn't you tell me who you were in the caves?" Jake asked. Zerith looked down at her hands. "Because I knew if you saw my real face, you would run away like everyone else does. In the caves, with my hood up, I could just be myself. I could talk to someone without seeing disgust or pity in their eyes." Jake felt his heart break a little. He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he gently touched her face. "I don't see disgust when I look at you," he said honestly. "I see the person who saved my life. I see someone who knows 17 languages and can read the history of a planet in crystal formations. I see the kindest, most intelligent person I've ever met." Tears started to form in Zerith's eyes. As the first tear rolled down her cheek, something amazing happened. Where the tear touched her skin, the dull gray scales began to shimmer and change color, showing hints of the most beautiful patterns Jake had ever seen. "What's happening?" Jake asked in wonder. "I don't know," Zerith whispered, touching her face, where the tear had fallen. "This has never happened before." More tears followed, and with each one, more of her true appearance began to show through. The gray scales started to shift and change, revealing colors that seemed to move and dance like the surface of a soap bubble. The asymmetrical features of her face began to balance and align. "You're beautiful," Jake said, and he meant it completely. Zerith looked at him with amazement. "You really mean that, don't you? You're not just saying it to be kind. I mean it more than I've ever meant anything in my life," Jake replied. "I've been looking for you ever since that day in the caves. I didn't care what you looked like. I just wanted to find the person who showed me such kindness and wisdom." As they talked, the transformation continued slowly but steadily. It was as if some invisible weight was being lifted away from Zerith, allowing her true self to finally emerge. "There's something I need to tell you," Zerith said, her voice growing stronger and more confident, "about why I look the way I do, about why I was hiding in those caves in the first place." Jake took her hands in his. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. You saved my life once. Now let me help save yours." For the first time since he had known her, Zerith smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. And as she smiled, the transformation accelerated, revealing more and more of the incredible person she truly was underneath. Jake realized that in choosing the ugly princess, he hadn't just repaid a debt or made a political alliance. He had found something much more valuable, a true partnership with someone who understood him completely. And judging by the way Zerith was looking at him now, she had found the same thing. The real adventure was just beginning. As the night grew deeper, Zerith's transformation continued slowly but surely. Each tear that fell seemed to wash away another layer of the strange appearance that had hidden her true self for so long. Jake watched in amazement as the woman he had met in the caves gradually emerged from behind what he now realized was some kind of magical disguise. But with each change came more pain in Zerith's eyes. It wasn't physical pain. It was the deep hurt of someone who had been carrying a terrible secret for far too long. "I need to tell you the whole truth," Zerith said, sitting down on the edge of the large bed that dominated their chamber. "About why I look like this, about why I was alone in those caves on Theros." Jake sat beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but not so close that she would feel trapped. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Zerith took a deep breath and began her story. 7 years ago, I was very different from how you first saw me. I was considered the most beautiful of all my father's daughters. But more than that, I was also the smartest. While my sisters learned dancing and music, I studied mathematics, science, and languages. She paused, looking down at her hands, which were continuing to change. The gray scales were becoming more colorful with each passing minute. My father, the emperor, was very proud of me. He used to bring me to important meetings with other planetary leaders. I could speak their languages, understand their customs, and help negotiate better deals for our empire. My sisters were beautiful, but I was useful. Jake could hear the sadness in her voice. That doesn't sound like a bad thing. It wasn't at first, Zirith continued, but it made someone very jealous. My stepmother, Queen Valara. She married my father when I was 15, and she brought her own daughter from a previous marriage. Zirith stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the alien city sparkling in the distance. Queen Valara wanted her daughter to be the most important princess in the empire. But as long as I was around, that would never happen. I was too smart, too useful to my father, so she decided to do something about it. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What did she do? She found a sorcerer from the Void Realms. Zirith said quietly, the Void Realms are dark places between star systems where creatures practice ancient magic. Most people think they're just stories, but they're real, and they're dangerous. Zirith turned back to face Jake, and he could see fear in her eyes even as her features continued to become more beautiful. The sorcerer cast a curse on me. It changed how I looked, making me appear ugly and deformed. But that wasn't the worst part. The curse also made sure that no one would ever love me for who I really was. What do you mean? Jake asked, though he was starting to understand. The curse was designed to be permanent unless someone could see past my appearance and love the real me, not my beauty, not my royal status, but my mind and my heart. Queen Valara thought that would never happen. She thought I would spend the rest of my life alone and forgotten. Jake reached out and took her hand, but she was wrong. Zirith smiled through her tears. For 7 years, I believed she was right. Suitors came to the palace regularly, hoping to marry one of the emperor's daughters. They would take one look at me and immediately turn to my sisters. Some of them would laugh, others would whisper cruel things when they thought I couldn't hear. The transformation was happening faster now. Jake could see that Zirith's true form was nothing like what he had first witnessed in the arena. Her scales weren't just changing color, they were becoming something extraordinary, with patterns that seemed to shift and dance like living artwork. So, I stopped trying to be part of court life. Zirith continued. I threw myself into studying instead. I learned everything I could about science, history, languages, and mathematics. I became an expert in stellar navigation and alien cultures. Knowledge became my escape. Is that why you were on Theros? Jake asked. Yes. I started taking solo trips to different moons and planets, always in disguise. It was the only way I could explore and learn without people staring at me or making cruel comments. The caves on Theros contained some of the oldest crystal formations in this solar system. I was studying them to understand how this planet system was formed. Jake remembered their conversations in the cave. That's how you knew so much about reading the crystal patterns. I've spent years learning to find beauty and knowledge in places where most people don't think to look, Zirith said. When you're forced to live in the shadows, you discover amazing things that others miss. She sat back down beside Jake, and he could see that her face was almost completely transformed now. She was becoming breathtakingly beautiful, but in a way that was completely different from her sisters, where they had a cold, perfect beauty. Zirith had warmth and intelligence shining through her features. The worst part, she continued, was watching my father slowly give up on me. At first, he tried to find suitors who might look past my appearance. But as the years went by and no one showed any interest, he stopped trying. I think he started to believe that Queen Valara was right, that I was just meant to be alone. Jake felt anger building in his chest. That's terrible. Your father should have protected you. He didn't know about the curse, Zirith said quickly. Queen Valara was very careful. She made sure the curse looked like a natural condition, something that might have been caused by illness or accident. My father felt sorry for me, but he never suspected that someone had done this to me on purpose. What about your sisters? Didn't they try to help? Zirith's expression became even sadder. Some of them pitied me. Others ignored me completely. A few were actually relieved that I was no longer competition for them. None of them ever tried to include me or defend me when others were cruel. The transformation was nearly complete now. Jake could see that the real Zirith was someone of incredible beauty, but it wasn't just physical. There was a light in her eyes that spoke of wisdom, kindness, and strength that had been tested by years of hardship. But the strangest thing, Zirith said, looking directly at Jake, was that the curse never affected how I felt inside. I could see my reflection and know that I looked different, but I never felt ugly. I always knew that the real me was still there, just hidden. Maybe that's why it could be broken, Jake suggested. Because you never lost faith in who you really were. Maybe, Zirith agreed. Or maybe it was because you saw me first without knowing what I was supposed to look like. In those caves, I was just a person helping another person. There were no expectations, no judgments based on appearance or royal status. Jake squeezed her hand gently. You saved my life in those caves. You showed me kindness when you had no reason to help a stranger. That's when I fell in love with you, even though I didn't realize it at the time. Zirith's eyes filled with tears again. But these were happy tears. You really mean that? I've never meant anything more in my entire life, Jake replied. The woman I met in those caves was the most amazing person I'd ever encountered. Beautiful, brilliant, kind, and brave. When I saw you in the arena today, I knew I had found you again. As he spoke, the last traces of the curse seemed to fade away completely. Zirith was now fully transformed, revealing her true self in all its glory. But the most beautiful thing about her wasn't her appearance. It was the joy and hope that had returned to her eyes. So what happens now? She asked. Jake smiled. Now we show everyone who you really are, and we make sure Queen Velara never hurts anyone like this again. The first rays of sunlight streaming through their chamber window woke Jake the next morning. For a moment, he thought he had dreamed everything that happened the night before. But when he turned over, he saw Zirith sitting by the window, and his breath caught in his throat. The transformation was now complete. The woman beside him was absolutely magnificent. Her scales showed patterns that seemed to contain entire galaxies, shifting from deep blue to silver to gold as the light hit them. But more than her physical beauty, there was something about her presence that filled the entire room with energy and intelligence. Good morning, she said, turning to smile at him. Her voice was different too, stronger and more confident than it had been just hours before. You're really here, Jake said. Softly, you're really free. Thanks to you, Zirith replied. But I think our real adventure is just beginning. Before Jake could ask what she meant, loud voices erupted from the hallway outside their chamber. Someone was shouting orders, and he could hear the sound of many footsteps running past their door. What's going on out there? Jake wondered aloud. Zirith stood up gracefully. I think it's time for the morning presentation ceremony, every day after a royal wedding. The new couple is presented to the court. It's tradition. Jake's stomach dropped. Are you ready for that? For everyone to see you like this? I've been hiding for 7 years, Zirith said with determination. I'm not hiding anymore. An hour later, they stood outside the great throne room waiting for their announcement. Jake could hear the buzz of conversation from hundreds of courtiers, diplomats, and nobles gathered inside. He was wearing his best military dress uniform, but he still felt underdressed compared to the elaborate alien fashions he knew were waiting for them. Princess Zirith and Captain Jake Rodriguez called the royal announcer. The massive doors opened, and they walked into the throne room together. Jake expected the usual polite applause that greeted royal presentations. Instead, complete silence fell over the entire hall. Every single person in the room was staring at Zirith with their mouths open. Some of the alien diplomats actually dropped the ceremonial gifts they had been holding. Even Emperor Xanther, who had seen thousands of remarkable things in his long life, looked completely shocked. Princess Lyrale, who had been whispering with some courtiers, suddenly stopped mid-sentence and stared at her sister as if she had never seen her before. Princess Valeth actually stood up from her chair, her strategic mind probably trying to figure out how this change was possible. But the most dramatic reaction came from Queen Velara. The stepmother who had caused all of Zirith's suffering went completely white when she saw her stepdaughter's true form. She gripped the arms of her throne so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Zirith? Emperor Xanther finally spoke, his voice filled with wonder. Is that really you? Yes, father, Zirith replied, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. This is who I've always been underneath. The emperor slowly stood up from his throne and walked down the steps. Toward them, as he got closer, Jake could see tears forming in the old ruler's eyes. My daughter, he whispered, you're so beautiful. But how is this possible? Zirith looked directly at Queen Velara as she spoke. 7 years ago, someone cast a curse on me to hide my true appearance. Last night, that curse was finally broken. The silence in the hall became even deeper, if that was possible. Everyone was now looking between Zirith and Queen Velara, trying to understand what was happening. A curse, the emperor said, his voice growing dangerous. Who would dare curse one of my daughters? Before Zirith could answer, Queen Velara suddenly stood up. This is impossible, she shouted, pointing at Zirith. The curse was supposed to be permanent. No one could ever love her enough to break it. The moment the words left her mouth, Queen Velara realized her mistake. The entire court now knew that she was responsible for what had happened to Zirith. Emperor Xanther turned toward his wife with fury in his eyes that Jake had never seen before. You did this to my daughter? Queen Velara tried to backtrack, but it was too late. I didn't mean. She was always so much smarter than my daughter. I just wanted, guards, the emperor roared. Arrest Queen Velara immediately. As the guards moved toward the queen, Zirith stepped forward. Wait, father. Everyone in the hall looked at her in surprise. After everything Queen Velara had put her through, Zirith was asking for mercy. Queen Velara has already lost, Zirith said calmly. Her plan failed. I found love despite her curse. Punishing her now won't give me back the 7 years I lost, and it won't make our empire stronger. Jake felt his love for Zirith grow even deeper, even after all the pain she had suffered. She was choosing forgiveness over revenge. However, Zirith continued, her voice becoming firmer. I do have a proposal for both you and the court. Emperor Xanther nodded for her to continue. Jake and I want to leave the Zephyrian court. Zirith announced, we want to establish a new kind of academy on a neutral world. A place where beings from all different species can come to learn about each other. The court erupted in surprised murmurs. This was not what anyone had expected. For too long, different alien races have misunderstood each other because we only see surface appearances. Zirith explained, humans think Zephyrians are just warriors. Zephyrians think humans are weak. Other species make assumptions about everyone based on old stories and prejudices. Jake stepped forward to support her. What if there was a place where young people from every world could come to study together, where they could learn each other's languages, cultures, and ways of thinking? It would prevent wars, Zirith added. It would create understanding instead of fear. And it would prove that the most important qualities in any being are not what they look like, but how they think and how they treat others. Emperor Xanther was quiet for a long moment, considering their proposal. Finally, he smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from him. My daughter, you continue to amaze me, he said. You've turned your suffering into wisdom, and now you want to share that wisdom with the galaxy. I will provide funding for this academy, and I will encourage other planetary leaders to send their brightest young people to learn from you. The crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to thunderous approval. Jake realized that they weren't just applauding the idea of the academy. They were celebrating Zirith's transformation from a hidden, cursed princess into a leader who could change the galaxy. 6 months later, Jake and Zirith stood on the observation deck of their new academy, watching the first group of students arrive. There were young humans from Earth, Zephyrian cadets, crystal beings from the Andromeda sector, and dozens of other species that Jake was still learning to identify. Do you think it will work? Jake asked, watching a human teenager trying to communicate with a 6-armed alien student using hand gestures. Look, Zirith said, pointing to another group where a young Zephyrian was teaching some human students how to read star charts. It's already working. Jake put his arm around his wife and smiled. They had started with a chance meeting in a cave, continued with an impossible choice in an arena. And now they were building something that could bring peace to the entire galaxy. You know what the best part is? Jake said. What's that, Queen? Villara thought she was destroying your future when she cursed you. But if she hadn't, you never would have been on Theros alone. We never would have met, and none of this would have happened, Zirith laughed. The sound filling Jake with joy, so in trying to ruin my life. She actually gave me the most beautiful life I could have imagined. Funny how that works, Jake agreed. As the sun set over their academy, casting beautiful colors across the sky of their new world, Jake and Zirith watched their students from dozens of different planets, learning to see past appearances and find the beauty in understanding each other. It was proof that the most valuable treasures are often hidden behind the most unlikely exteriors, and that true sight comes not from the eyes, but from the heart and mind working together. And in the Academy's central hall, carved in letters that could be read by every species in the galaxy, was the motto that had started it all. We all wear masks. Some are just more visible than others.